Here we go, Mike. We're good.
All right, folks. Welcome, everybody, once again to our recruiting show for IrishSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Mike Frank, here with Christian McCollum, and we are going to talk some 2026 recruiting today. We've got some wide receivers we're going to pop up on the screen here. When you look at the class that they signed last year, obviously this is kind of a big need for Notre Dame. They only landed 3 players last year in Elijah Burroughs, Scrap Richardson, Jerome Bettis Jr. And, you know, I'm not trying to disparage those guys. I think they're all good players and guys who have a lot of potential here, Chris. But, when you look at a guy like Scrap Richardson, you say, man, elite athlete, but has never played wide receiver. Elijah Burroughs was not ranked that high originally. Really had a good senior season, and so I'm more excited about him and his future. And then, of course, I thought Jerome Bettis Jr. grew quite a bit as a prospect in his senior year and had a really productive year against some really good competition down there in Georgia. So I'm not down on these guys, but if you want to play for a national championship, you need some elite players. And so it's important for Notre Dame to follow up. What I think they have in last year's class, in my opinion, is a lot of what I call projectable guys that have the potential to be really good players. But right now you wouldn't, classify them as elite players. They're developmental players that once things get rolling and they get some coaching, I think that they have the ability to be very quality players and people who will definitely help the program. But are they somebody who can come in and start right away? That's kind of the question you ask. So I think it's important for Notre Dame to make sure that if they're recruiting guys, that they can get some guys who can come in early. They do have a good, solid list of guys that they're recruiting, and we're going to talk about that. But really, we kind of are narrowing it down to 4 right now. One already committed in Dylan Faison, but right now, based off of things we've heard, this is just kind of like the 4 that we would consider probably the top guys on the board right now, the top guys that they're recruiting, and a number of them been on campus and they have a solid shot at. But I think it's important for Notre Dame to make sure that they land some guys who can come and play early and have a chance to do that. When I look at the film of these guys, I'm sitting here and I'm saying, okay, I like the film. I think that they're all good, but they're sophomores, and it's hard to really say for sure what they're going to look like. For instance, if you look at sophomore film of say Elijah Burroughs or a Jerome Bettis Jr., probably wouldn't be near as impressed as what you see as a senior, and that's what you have to understand when you're watching these sophomore films and that type of thing. I'm not sure. Did you get some junior film at all?
Maybe I think we have some. Yeah, I think we have some junior stuff that we can show today.
Okay. So I looked at the sophomore film we had up, and then the Dylan Faison game cuts that we have from Irish Sports Daily that Matt Freeman does such a good job of. So those are the films that I watched. So I'll be commenting based off that. I haven't seen a lot of junior film yet of these guys. I looked for a couple but didn't see it, so maybe I missed it. But I went to look for them on the huddle and didn't find it, so I used mostly their sophomore film. But well, let's just start. Let's put up Naeem Burroughs. Let's start with him. All right. So when I watch this guy, first thing, this guy is a very talented player from a very talented high school. 6 foot, 165-pound wide receiver, Jacksonville, Florida, Bowles High School. First thing that stands out to me, Chris, Bowles High School. Yep, I can't remember a player that Notre Dame got from there. And again, my memory's terrible. We know this, but it's just very rare that Notre Dame lands a guy from this high school. So I think that's important to point out. It just doesn't happen very often. But then again, Notre Dame doesn't get players from Sarah, and all of a sudden they did this year. So it's, things are changing with Notre Dame. I'm just pointing out that it's rare that Notre Dame's in a race for a Bulls kid. It just doesn't usually happen. But having said that, this kid has a very strong interest in Notre Dame. What can you tell us about him before I start talking about his film?
Yeah, so he's a kid who just earlier this month, came out of the top 6, and Notre Dame was on that top 6 along with Florida, Florida State, Clemson, Wisconsin, and Texas. I talked to him last week, and he said these are the schools that he could see himself at. He had a much lengthier list of scholarship offers than that. But as he's moving through this process, he's ready to start focusing on the schools he really, really is serious about. And so Notre Dame's one of those. He's visited all of those schools except for Notre Dame and Texas. So it's never great when a kid hasn't visited, but at the same time, when a kid's making cuts and you're making that cut without a visit, obviously it gives you some upside to grow there. So he's hoping to get out to Notre Dame this spring. Texas is obviously another school he wants to get to. In those relationships he has, we're starting to see it. We kind of talked about it last year or last cycle. Hadn't heard a lot about Mike Brown. Now that, he's getting entrenched there, you're starting to hear his name more. In the relationship, Naeem said that relationship he has with Coach Brown is one of the reasons why Notre Dame made that list, along with, his relationship with Coach Freeman. So he's clearly a priority guy. He's impressed with what he's seen from Notre Dame on the field so far. When he visits, he's going to be looking at scheme. He's going to want to be knowing, how he'd be used in the offense. That coaching piece is obviously going to be important. He wants to have a good relationship with the coaches. Notre Dame's off to a good start there. As far as the scheme, I know he's impressed with what they've done so far this season. And then he's going to be looking at, on-campus things. How does he feel he fits on campus? So he's hoping to get out to Notre Dame sometime this offseason, likely in the spring, but he doesn't have any kind of timeline for a decision just yet.
When you look at a kid like this, first thing I think it's important to point out, this is a kid that's going to be kind of a make or break situation when he does visit. A lot of times with these kids, they come on the visit, it's either I absolutely love this place or they're out. And that's usually the type of situation that you run into when you're dealing with, big time players from Florida high schools. So important. I know Notre Dame loves this kid, thinks he's a great talent. I think he is too. There's no question about it. But got to get him on campus. If you get him on campus and he's still interested, then I think he's definitely a prospect. But the most important thing is to get him on campus sometime here, if not in the winter, but certainly in the spring, and hopefully, by spring, if not, certainly by summer. When I watch this kid's film, he reminds me a lot of Will Fuller on film. I'm not sure he's 6 foot, but he certainly looks 5'11". Outstanding speed. At times he's a really good route runner, but I do think he needs to improve here a little bit. But again, it's important to point out it's sophomore film. My guess is he's improved a lot in his time, as far as being a junior. A lot of these guys, when they realize they're prospects, they really, clamp down and just start really focusing big time. So I would guess his junior film's even more impressive. The nice thing that I like about him, he does a really nice job with the ball in the air of just kind of subtly nudging the defender to get some separation. A lot of guys you'll see will push off with their hands, that type of thing. He tends to use his body, which makes it not too obvious, and you won't draw a flag by doing that. And that's a real art of playing wide receivers, especially at the next level. And some guys just never get this. So, I think this guy could play slot for sure, but I also think he could be a field receiver. He's going to need to gain some size and some strength for sure. But this guy is a very explosive player. I think he's certainly a guy, as you see here, who can return kicks and punts. It's interesting because you watch a lot of the film of the guys they're looking at. They're all kind of similar players, guys who could play slot, guys who could play field. What I don't see is where's the the boundary receiver, the 6'3", 6'4", big, 205-pound body. I don't see that, which is surprising. I know they have Micah Gilbert from the previous class. They got Jerome Bettis Jr. Those two guys are what you'd consider boundary receivers, but don't really see so far in these top 4 the boundary receiver that they're focusing on. I'm sure there's going to be a name that pops up because they will need one. But at this point, Chris, it almost looks like they're only going to take 3 is the number we've heard, correct?
Yeah, that's what we've heard. Yep. And it's important to reiterate, these are the guys that we know they are after, right? This is not an exhaustive list of the only guys on the board by any means. But in terms of like, these are the guys that they are after, that, and also not just the guys they want, but these are guys that have, shown some serious mutual interest. So it's not simply a wish list of, pie in the sky, if we can get the Jeremiah Smiths of the world. So these are guys to know.
And that's the whole point of doing this show. And is we're trying to let Irish fans know, hey, these guys are legit targets. They're guys who have had a lot of communication with Notre Dame. They seem very interested. A number of them have already visited and remain interested after the visit, which is important. So I really like the fact that we're kind of narrowed down to this. I would expect that number of 3 to grow to 4, but you just don't know, because you don't know who's going to be around, who's going to get injured, what the transfer portal is going to look like, all that kind of stuff moving forward. But as of now, I think 3 is kind of the number you're looking for, and we'll go from there. All right, next guy I want to take a look at is Connor Salmin. Chris, dude, this guy's good, man. I love this guy as a player. I just think he's tremendous. And you look at his body, and 6'1", 190 pounds, from Purcellville, Virginia, Woodgrove High School. First of all, there's no doubt this is not the best competition in the world that he's facing. These are not, elite players. There's not going to be a lot of, high, power 4 players that are in this mix, that he's going against. But look at his ability to go up and get the football. The thing is, he's just a really explosive player. He's 6'1", 190, and I'd say that's legit. If you see him running there, he's got big, thick body, but just his overall speed and explosiveness. I love this kid. I really hope Notre Dame's in on this kid very high in the mix. I know he's visited, but just his ability to just pull away. Now, again, not the best competition, but he just blows everybody away with his top-end speed. But also his ability to make people miss. And for somebody thick like that, it's you don't see that kind of agility to turn left and right and do things. They use him as a gadget player, as you'll see a lot, a lot of jet sweeps, that type of thing. And you got to be a pretty, agile athlete to do a lot of these things. Now, the one thing I will say about his film, when you watch it again, this is sophomore film, so it's hard to say what he looked like as a junior. A lot of the film is kind of this go route stuff, back shoulder, go route. That's a great catch there. Shows his ability to track the ball, but a lot of go route stuff. You don't see a big route tree running situation with him where he's running a lot of crossing patterns and things like that. These are things that he's going to have to learn once he gets into the college level. But just the pure raw talent of this kid is really, really impressive. And I think he's going to be one of those underrated guys. I personally think he's a top 100 player, just like I think in the end, Naeem Burroughs is certainly going to be one of those guys as well. But, it probably won't be ranked that in the end because of the high school he plays against and that type of thing. But I think this kid's going to be a really special player, and I sure hope Notre Dame lands him. What can you tell us about this guy?
Yeah, you can see right here in this pick, he's a football player. That's the thing. When you talk about that speed and explosion, a lot of the stuff he's doing is not just like some fast kid out there playing football, put pads on, run down the field. You said, there's not a ton of route tree stuff on there, but you can see that he's a competitor. I mean, he picks up this fumble right here and takes it to the house, and he's intent on scoring, right? So that's kind of thing I like about him. As far as a recruit, I mean, this is one you got to give Notre Dame credit for. They were one of the very first schools to offer him back in May, or at least one of the very first big-time schools before he blew up. They were kind of out there on a limb. And we've seen obviously a lot of the big name schools come in. As you mentioned, he's visited Notre Dame multiple times already, including once for a game this past fall. He's a kid who has been on several visits to other schools. He's been to, schools down there like, Clemson, LSU, Tennessee, those kind of schools, but he's also ventured out across the country. He's been up, to the Midwest, obviously Notre Dame twice, been to Ohio State, been to Penn State, Northwestern, and he's also got to A&M and Stanford, among other schools. So obviously a kid that's really, really attacking the process. Notre Dame getting in there early. I think that solidified their spot on kind of his top upper echelon of schools. But, it's going to be hard. I mean, Georgia's a school that's after him. Virginia Tech's after him. Penn State, Ohio State, those schools are other schools he's clearly considering seriously right now. Obviously, like all these kids, Notre Dame's pitching their blend of academics and athletics. And that's something that's resonated with him so far. One of the big things that he kind of sees, and I'm sure Notre Dame's selling as a differentiator at this point. But he also, that's not the only thing he's looking for. He's not a kid that's just like, I want the best football and the best academics. That's simple. He wants to be developed as a receiver. He's serious about that. So understanding how that would work at a school like Notre Dame is important. His relationships with the coaching staffs are going to be important. It seems like Notre Dame's off to a good start there. And again, just the culture of the school he goes to, how he feels like he fits in it, is going to make a big deciding factor as well.
I think one thing you pointed out that's important is the getting in early. And this was something that Notre Dame just was not doing for a while. It drove me nuts. And Chris will know, he's worked with me for 15 years. Chris, I've been complaining about this for 15 years. And look, this is why it matters, because you get a kid like this that suddenly blows up, and you're one of the first one that they remember that, man. That's special to them that, hey, Notre Dame was one of the very first schools that saw me. They've been with me the entire time. They believed in me when nobody else really thought I was much of anything. It really matters to these kids. And so I think it's important to know that Notre Dame is trying to change that and get into it. Previously, they'd have these things where they'd say, well, we don't know. We want to see, their grades as a sophomore and junior, kind of get an idea, make sure they can get into school. What's it matter? It doesn't matter. If you can't get into school, you move on. But, hey, if you get in early, you have a chance to say, hey, look, we like you. We think you're special. And I think for a kid like this, that's one of the main reasons you want to do it. And I think it's going to help them in the end. I really hope Notre Dame lands this kid. He looks like the type of player that could really excel at Notre Dame. And just based off everything I've heard about him and his ability and his personality, I think he's the type of kid that's going to fit in really well with Notre Dame. So,
Mike, I think that what you just hit on, I think that's another reflection. We talk about it a lot about how Notre Dame is really confident in their evaluations. It's confidence bordering on arrogance, I guess, or I don't, whatever's between confidence and arrogance, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not hesitant to be the first school, one of the first big schools after a kid. It seems like they're eager to be that, right? So it's like we want, and it's not just for. I mean, the most important thing is what you said, right? You want to be in on a kid, show them that you believe in them, all that stuff. But it's also like, these guys are competitive people. So when they're able to say, hey, we evaluated this kid, we were the first one to offer him. Yeah, that helps with the kid. But it also, it's also something they want to do because they're competitive in this nature in terms of their evaluations.
All right, folks, let's move on. Let's move on right now to Trent Mosley, familiar name. Obviously, his brother went to Stanford, which was kind of a disappointment. But this is Trent Mosley. I think a kid who likes Notre Dame quite a bit. I've watched this kid's film a lot, and this kid's a really good player. And, here's the thing. 5'10", 160, the thing that stands out to me, he had a dominating season for one of the top teams in California, which really says a lot as a sophomore. Not the biggest guy. I'd say his measurables look accurate. He looks about 5'10", has legit top-end speed. There's no doubt about that. To me, he looks like kind of a slot receiver for sure. He's very, very explosive, outstanding quickness. He has the ability to move laterally, kind of the perfect gadget type player, a guy who could return kicks, jet sweeps, can use him in motion, can you put him in the backfield, run screens with him. He's just a guy that you always got to keep an eye on when he's on the field because he can score from anywhere on the field. I'm going to throw a name out here, and that people are probably going to get crazy about this because I'm not sure. I'm not sure he's all of 5'10", but he certainly looks at least 5'9". But I tell you, when you watch his route running ability and the things that he does, he reminds me a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he really does. And I know that's crazy to think, but let's be honest. 60% of the reason that Amon-Ra St. Brown is successful is his work ethic. So if Trent Mosley wants to be a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's going to have that same kind of work ethic. But just his short area quickness. The thing that stands out to me is his feet and how he uses his body so subtly to get open. And that's what Amon-Ra does. I've watched, obviously, a lot of him at USC and when he was a recruit, and certainly at the Detroit Lions. Everybody knows I'm a big fan. What Amon-Ra does so well is he uses his body, just these very little subtle motions. Right here's a good example of this. No, this is not the play I'm thinking. But just a very subtle motions that he uses that gets him open. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't slow him down in his routes. Just these little shoulder movements and quick twitch type things that the best receivers have. And when I watch Mosley, that's what I see with him as well. He's just got this ability to make people do something that he wants them to do with just very small movements. They use him, as you see, a lot in the backfield, which I think is what you'd see, no matter where he's at. Has the ability to just do a lot of these types of things and then make a big explosive play like this. What can you tell us about him, Chris?
Yeah, I that's an interesting comparison, the Amon-Ra one. For me, getting to know, I got to know Amon-Ra when he was young, because of Equanimeous, and kind of get to know his background. And you kind of mentioned that about how his work ethic. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a dog. Like this is the kind of kid that when he was a little kid, he'd go to Equanimeous's games, and the other younger siblings, they would play like they often do, and they nicknamed him Freddy because they were all scared of him as like Freddy Krueger. So, and then just watching Amon-Ra, we watched him a ton at camps, off-season camps, and it's just like he's probably the most dog person I've ever recovered.
Totally.
You're talking about the kind of kid who would go to Irish Invasion, beat someone one-on-one, and then punt the ball into the stands.
Totally,
just during a rep.
Yeah.
So, but so that's what I think of when I think about Amon-Ra as a prospect. But I see what you're saying here. Just as a player, I got you there. So, obviously you mentioned familiar name. His brother Emmett Mosley, Notre Dame recruited very heavily. He's at Stanford now. But of course, the parents, right? Emmett Mosley. We're not that old, Mike, but we remember him playing.
I do.
And I don't think it gets overlooked anymore too much because, we've mentioned it a lot, especially with regard to his brother. But his mom went to Notre Dame and was an elite level soccer player. She won what's equivalent to the Heisman Trophy in college soccer for Notre Dame. So this is a truly athletic family. As we said, brothers at Stanford came on like crazy at the end of this his freshman season here. But I remember speaking to his parents early in Emmett's process, and they were never going to push him to Notre Dame. But at the same time, especially early on, they were definitely not going to stand in his way to go to Notre Dame. Let's just put it that way. Probably would have been thrilled. I'm sure they would have been thrilled had he picked Notre Dame. So, I was a little kind of, hesitant to see his name pop up as one of the top guys. And when we're talking top guys, regardless of position with this kid, he is a top target for Notre Dame. So I was like, oh, well, it seemed like, how's that going to work? You guys didn't get brother. And Notre Dame's confident. I think they feel better about their chances this time with Mike Brown leading up the recruitment. Take that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But his interest is clear. The kid's already been to Notre Dame multiple times. It's not a sightseeing thing, right? When your parents are both athletes, former athletes, you can go back to Notre Dame whenever you want. It's not a thing where I'm never going to have this chance. I got to take a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go visit Notre Dame. I'm not really interested. Been there already with brother during his recruitment. So, again, when you're making unofficial visits to a place you've been to multiple times, it's not a sightseeing tour. There's interest there. And I think, they're obviously going to have to battle Stanford, where his brother's at. USC and UCLA are also in the mix. And then there's Notre Dame. So it's kind of like the answer to the SAT question, right? Which one of these is not like the other? And a lot of times, Notre Dame ends up, I kind of think it's a good sign a lot of the times when Notre Dame is that, one thing that's not like the others. So we'll see. Not to say they lead for him. They're definitely going to get him. But this is a guy they're going to put a lot of resources in, and they wouldn't be doing that if they didn't think they had a really, really good shot.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. I think with Emmett, I'm not sure that he was overly that interested in Notre Dame compared to what Trent is. I do think Trent is more interested in Notre Dame, and that's encouraging. And again, I just see there's just a little tiny subtle movements that he makes there that just make people like that move there. Just a little tiny little thing that got him in the end zone, and that's what Amon-Ra is so good at, and that's why he's always open. And he doesn't look like, like the most crazy athlete, but he just continues to just do these things. And you're just like, wow, how does he do that? And it's just those little subtle movements that he makes. And this guy's going to be a good football player. There's no doubt about it. And it'll be interesting to see, how interested he is in the end. But I would love to have him on the team. He can do so many things for you. And I do think he's more of a slot than a field guy at this point. But hey, you want to get those types of players for sure. All right, we're going to move on to Dylan Faison. And this is an interesting kid, of course, because we know that his brother plays at Notre Dame. 5'11", 170, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, St. Andrews High School. Again, I'd say that looks about right. His size, 5'11", 170. It's interesting because he's a lot like Mosley and Burroughs in that he brings that explosive, outstanding speed. He can return kicks. He can return punts, play the slot. I think he can play the field. I think he's going to be a potential field receiver. What I like about him already is that he's already a very solid route runner, and he has kind of an expanded route tree. He runs a lot of different routes that we get to see on film, which tells me that he's run a bunch of this stuff because he's pretty polished at it, which is exciting. I think he shows really good hands. Goes up and makes a lot of plays and has the ability to track the ball really well. Again, he's another guy you can run the gadget stuff and the screens with. He's already bigger and more polished than his brother was coming in. So, I'd expect him to make a splash pretty early. And here's the thing. You have to remember, this guy's the number one lacrosse recruit, Chris. So this guy spends a lot of time focusing on that, and rightfully so. If you're the number one lacrosse recruit, you're going to spend time focusing on that. So he hasn't really spent the hours that say, a Naeem Burroughs probably has spent on his game because he's focused so much on lacrosse. So how much better could this guy be when he starts focusing on more football and more of his football skills? Now, potentially he could be a tremendous player. He'll need to get bigger, but again, with the lacrosse schedule, how much time is he going to have to really put forth doing that? But, that was a great route there. It shows the ability to separate and make people miss. Again, he just runs a lot of different types of routes in the film that we see, and there's not a whole lot of film, but again, the ability to get vertical, the ability to, again, this nice solid route there. I think this guy is a very underrated player. He's not going to get real ranked real high because he's already committed. So I don't expect him to really jump up a tremendous amount. And he doesn't have he's not 6'3", he doesn't have the big, huge body that everybody looks for. But I do think he's an underrated player. And again, shows great. That's a great catch right there. Great ability to go up and get the football. So, and I love his ability at corner as well. I mean, he shows it quite a bit here, picks off a number of plays. Like to see him be a little more physical there, but that's what he's an offensive player. Let him do his offensive things. So, what do we know about Dylan and Notre Dame's thoughts on him?
Yeah, so he's a guy that was easier for them to project. Obviously, Jordan came in as a lacrosse recruit and a walk-on who splashed freshman year, but Notre Dame was able to say, "Hey, look at this kid should be the same as Jordan, or at least similar." And so it made it easier to project, at least for some people. And they see him as like you said, Mike, he's slightly bigger, especially like he's younger. And he's probably a little bit bigger than him already.
Yeah.
But they see him as a twitchier version of him.
Yeah, I agree.
So they see him as having a higher ceiling than Jordan does.
No question.
One of the things and this is a kid that's bought in, right? So Notre Dame was his first football offer. took a couple days and said, boom, we're going, to Notre Dame. And that seems pretty locked and loaded. One of the things I look at is like, man, just think about the balls it took to start or to at least play a freshman walk-on at receiver. Now, I know they didn't have a lot of options last year, but at the same time, it's pretty gutsy to go out there and say, all right, we're gonna put this freshman walk-on in, and obviously he produced. But even if you were just in a situation where you're like, oh, we kind of like what we might have something in this freshman walk-on. Let's see what we have next year. He could help us down the road. If you don't have the guts to put him in last year, who knows? Maybe he gets hurt again this year and doesn't really show, doesn't really flash. We might not even know his name. And you don't have anything with this kid, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, that could really, that decision, subtle decision in a somewhat, disappointing season, could really, pay dividends for years and years and years to come. So it's just interesting to look back on how, little things can kind of blossom into bigger things down the road.
Here's the thing. They didn't need to offer him either, right?
Nope.
The kid didn't have any offers in football at that point. They didn't, they knew there was probably likely that if he did get an offer that he was going to commit, because I was already, with lacrosse and Notre Dame and his brother being there, Notre Dame was clearly the school that he'd like to go to. And they just said, okay, well, by the way, we're going to offer you a full scholarship versus what lacrosse can do. And by the way, you'll probably get some NIL money that you won't get from lacrosse either. So that was an easy decision for him, no question. So they knew when they offered him that it was probably a kid that's going to commit pretty early, and they still took him, which means they really, really like him. And you see his film and you realize why. This guy can be a really special player. When he focuses more on football, he's going to be good. But again, that's just a great catch, Chris. For a guy who isn't 100% I'm football that he has really nice traits to be a very, very good player for Notre Dame. So
so like you said Mike, like this is a kid they wouldn't have offered him unless they wanted him, right?
No doubt,
they could have been one of the last schools to offer him. So that just kind of tells you that this is a kid they really, really wanted. It's not a kid that they were just like settling for at the end of the process. So that's important to know.
Yeah, no question about it. All right. Well, if anybody has any questions in the chat, we'd answer them. But it doesn't look like, there's any questions right now. But folks, we're going to keep doing this each week. Christian and I are going to go through position by position. We're going to show you guys we think are their top prospects, and we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on here. So. We'll show you. We'll talk about each guy. We'll give you some insight as to, why they like them, where they fit into the roster and that type of thing. So hope you're enjoying this. We'll be doing it every Wednesday, Christian and I. Thanks for joining the recruiting show. If you're not a member of Irish Sports Daily, go to the front page, click on the premium section. You can sign up with, obviously, the playoff going. We got the portal coming. There's a lot going on with Notre Dame football right now, a lot to get excited about. Also, make sure you like us on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next week on The Recruiting Show.